if a particular teaching or if a particular law is no longer bringing happiness and harmony to society, then it should be discarded and hence it should be replaced by something else. In Hinduism, there was never an injunction against women enjoying sexual pleasure. Bible tells women, shut up, don't open your mouth in churches. We cannot tolerate a woman raising her voice, asking questions and all these things. If you have any doubt, go home and humbly, submissively ask your husbands to explain that. The most celebrated form of marriage is Gandharva Vivaha, where a boy and the girl, they meet each other, typically in a village fair, and then they will fall in love with each other, okay, and then they start living together, then the parents come and solemnize their marriage.
Namaste everyone. Thank you for watching Sangam Talks. Today we are going to cover a very recently erupted controversy on Udayanidhi Stalin's recent statement to eradicate Sanatan Dharma. And to speak on this controversy, we have invited Kalawai Venkatji, who is a practicing Hindu and a writer. He is the author of What Every Hindu Should Know About Christianity. Udayanidhi Stalin is a Dravidanist politician and I.N.D.I. alliance leader who has equated Sanatan Dharma with dengue and malaria and called for its eradication, alleging that it propagates iniquities. So via this particular talk, Kalawai Venkatji is going to address a few pertinent questions like, are Sanatan Dharma and Hinduism different? Is Sanatan Dharma less equitable than Christianity and Islam? What's this controversy really all about? Could someone argue that Christianity and Islam should be eradicated because they promote iniquity? And why Sanatan Dharma is the torchbearer of humanity? So with this, I would like Kalawai Venkatji to take over the session.
Namaste, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on wherever you are. Today, we are going to talk about a very important and at the same time very controversial topic. So a week ago, Udayanidhi Stalin, who is a minister in the Indi Alliance, as well as the ruling DMK dispensation in Tamil Nadu, who is also the son of the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Stalin, he made a statement. He attended a conference where he called for the complete eradication of Sanatana Dharma. He equated Sanatana Dharma with dengue and with malaria, and he said we cannot engage these kind of religions, and hence we have to completely eradicate Sanatana Dharma. So at the core of it, what are his arguments and how should we respond? We as Hindus, how should we respond to those arguments? That's the topic of our discussion, because what I also find is a lot of Hindus respond only emotionally, whereas our opponents are very systematic and then they plan such maneuvers, and hence our response should also be very well calibrated and should be factual. So before I get into the actual topic, a word or two about Udayanidhi Stalin. So his family, his grandfather was the erstwhile Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Karunanidhi, and Karunanidhi was a rabid Hindu hater and also a Dravidianist politician. And their hatred was not just directed at the Hindus. They hated the Hindus, they hated Hinduism, they hated Hindi language. They had a lot of animosity towards North Indians. They hated people from other states, Kannadigas, for example, Malayalis, for example. So they will, from time to time, they will expose hatred against all of those people too. And anti-Brahmin hatred has been a mainstay of the Dravidianist movement for well over a century now. Okay, so when it comes from someone like Udayanidhi Stalin, it should not be surprising that he even made those statements. However, in the case of Udayanidhi Stalin, it goes a step further. His wife is a Christian, and Udayanidhi Stalin himself declared, since I married a Christian woman, I am a Christian too. So in this case, we should look at it as an attack by a Christian demagogue on Hindu Dharma. This is the opening preamble I wanted to start with. And with that preamble, let's take it apart word by word. What is his actual accusation? What is the real meaning of that? Okay. And then how should we respond to that? So at the core of his charge is that Hinduism promotes caste inequities and Hinduism treats women unfairly. So those are the two charges he levels. And based on those charges, he calls for a complete eradication of Hindu Dharma. And he uses the word Sanatana Dharma. So the first question we should answer is, are Sanatana Dharma and Hinduism one and the same? So if we go back, what is the first time the word Hinduism is used or the word Hindu is used? It's the recorded evidences. It was used for the first time in the 6th century BC. That is about 25, 2600 years before present. It's found in the Behistun inscription in Iran during the reign of Darius the Great. Darius the First, during his reign, he uses the word Hindu, okay, to refer to the people and the country that reside on the eastern side of the river Sindhu. So everything in Sanskrit that started with S became H in Old Persian or Old Iranian. For example, the river Sindhu, they pronounced it as Hindu. And similarly, the word Sapta becomes Hapta. Not only in other languages, but not only in Persian, but also when you go to other Indo-European languages like Greek, Latin, etc. That's how the transformation happens. So the first time the word Hindu or Hinduism, etc., are used is by foreigners, okay, by Persians. They refer to us, the people who resided on the eastern side of river Sindhu, as Hindu. And it was not a word we used to describe ourselves in the beginning. And this is not a new thing, okay? So this has happened with a lot of other peoples and a lot of other cultures. For example, the Hebrew people or the Jewish people of Israel, okay? So what does the word Hebrew mean? There's a lot of debate around that, but mostly the linguists have concluded that the word Hebrew means people who lived on the other side of the river. So these were seen as foreigners, okay? So by the other people who lived in what we call the Near East or the Middle Eastern region, in and around Palestine, Israel, etc. Okay, so they saw the Hebrew people as those who lived on the other side of the river. Okay, so this term was coined by outsiders, but the Hebrew people have internalized it. Over a period of time, when everybody calls you a Hebrew, then you start referring to yourself as Hebrew. So that's the same thing that happened with Hindus. Initially, the term was not an abusive term. Okay, the term was simply a geographic pointer. It referred to people who lived on the eastern side of the river Sindhu, and hence they used the term. And over a period of time, probably in the last 1,000 years or so, the word Hindu has become more common in its usage, and Hindus themselves have started calling themselves by that word. And why did that happen? One of the major reasons is the Islamic invasions. The Islamic invasions start happening in Pakistan or in the Sindh region around 8th century, according to the common narrative. And then when you come to the mainland India, which is today Gujarat and other places, it starts happening around the 11th century. So that's the time when the Muslim invaders start referring to us as Hindus, and over a period of time, we start calling ourselves Hindus too. So, and like I mentioned, this has common parallels in the Hebrew culture too. And then the word India itself is a cognate of Hindu. Just like the river Sindhu became Hindu in Persian, and the country became in Greek, it became India, Indica, etc. Okay, that's why when Megasthenes comes with Alexander, the Macedonian king, during his invasion of India, he writes a book called Indica. Okay, so this is a very common usage. So once again, these are cognates. Cognates are words that come from the same root and have the same meaning across multiple languages. So Hindu and India are simply cognates in Persian and Greek respectively, which refer to the same root, which is the nation of India, the religion, the culture, the peoples of India, okay, or those who lived on the eastern side of river Sindh. So that's a long preamble, but I just wanted to set the context for where the word Hindu originated. And the question now arises, before Hinduism came, the word Hinduism, Hindu, etc. were invented, what did we call ourselves? Did we have a name for our religion? Okay. And I think this may sound like a strange question, but I think this is where we have to understand the distinction between Hinduism on one hand and Abrahamic religions like Christianity and Islam on the other. So Abrahamic religions, let's stick to the example of Christianity and Islam, they all start with a single founder. Okay. In the case of Christianity, it starts with Jesus. They may have justification going back to the Old Testament, but pretty much the religion is centered around Jesus. And it's centered, in the case of Islam, it's Muhammad. Okay, Muhammad comes with a set of revelations. He claims to have received some revelations through Jibreel, and it starts with that. And then they have a single scripture. In the case of Christians, it's the Bible. It's a collection of books, but still a single scripture from their perspective. In the case of Islam, it's the Quran, once again, which is a collection of multiple verses gathered over a long period of time. Even according to the Islamic narrative, it was gathered over 23 years of time. But historically, it took much longer, okay, over a few centuries, but it's still a single scripture for them. Whereas Hinduism is not a book based on, it's not a religion based on a single founder. It's not a religion based on a single book. Instead, Hinduism is like a library. It slowly evolved. It evolved naturally. And then, while I do agree that a lot of Hindus also believe that Hinduism is an eternal religion. However, I take a more scientific approach to that. Okay, nothing is eternal. Okay, human beings evolved. Okay, and then civilizations evolved. And then we know that things like the Neolithic age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, everything existed. So we cannot completely dismiss all of those things and insist that our religion is eternal. However, when we say something is Sanatana or eternal, what did we really mean? Okay, what we meant was that this did not have a single founder. Okay, this did not have an artificial point of origin. Rather, it's a natural evolution. Okay, over a period of time. So new philosophies can come and then they get built on top of one another. So we started calling ourselves as practitioners of Dharma. Okay, Dharma is not a single book or a single set of dogmas, but it is very diverse and competing thoughts, some of them mutually reconcilable. And when you go back in time, you will find traditions such as the Lokayata tradition. Okay, you will find Nyaya Vaisheshika tradition. Okay, these are all comprehensive sets of philosophies with their own practices, their own texts. They may not agree with other schools such as Vedanta or Bhakti Hinduism and all of those things. Yet they were part of the same dharmic umbrella. Not only that, even Buddhism described itself as Dhammo Sanatana in Pali language. When you go back to the Tripitaka texts, which are all compiled before the 3rd century BCE, that's 2300 years before present, they describe themselves as Dhammo Sanatana, which is the Pali cognate of Dharma Sanatana, a word that is used in Manusmriti. Okay, so what we see here is it's not only what we call the Hindu traditions of today, but even Buddhist traditions and even other traditions in India, they call themselves as Sanatana Dharma. So the Sanatana Dharma has been a more natural term, and it did not mean origins at a particular point in time. It did not mean appeal to a single book or anything, but it referred to a comprehensive collection of texts, traditions, philosophies, and practices. All of those were called Sanatana Dharma. So for all practical purposes and for all historical purposes, and even from our own internal purpose, Hinduism and Sanatana Dharma are exactly the same words. Hinduism being a term used by foreigners to describe us, and Sanatana Dharma being the term we use to describe ourselves. That's the only difference. Okay, so, and this is the beginning. And now, what is the charge of Udayanidhi Stalin? Let's go back to that. His charges are twofold. Hinduism, I'll use Hinduism here and Sanatana Dharma interchangeably, so but they mean the same. So his charges, Hinduism promotes caste inequities, and Hinduism promotes inequities against women. And his charge number 2 is Hinduism is Sanatana Dharma, which means eternal religion. And since it is eternal, it cannot undergo any change. Since it cannot undergo any change, it has to be eradicated. Let's go back to the fundamental argument. We talk of trees as having lived for thousands of years. Sometimes we use the term, this tree has been standing there from time immemorial. And some of the trees, like in the North America, you'll find the redwood trees. They live for thousands of years. And in India, you'll find the banyan tree. Okay, that lives for thousands of years. Okay, so what do we say when we say this tree has been there from time immemorial? Okay, because it's very difficult, right? If a tree has lived for 3,000 years, nobody knows how long it has lived. Unless you cut the tree and look at the rings and all these things, it's very hard for you to tell that. We do not mean the tree never underwent any change. Okay, actually, year after year, the tree grows organically. Okay, that's why it forms a ring every year. Okay, and then this tree evolves. This tree forms new branches. Okay, this tree sometimes meets with fire, it meets with floods and everything. It survives those things. Then it adapts itself to the new environment. So when we say something is eternal, it does not mean it never underwent change. It actually means it always underwent change. And the same applies to Hinduism. Hinduism, when we say eternal, we do not mean it did not undergo change. We rather say it always underwent change. It continues to undergo change. And hence, if something is no longer relevant, that's what Manusmriti says. If it says, if a particular teaching or if a particular law is no longer bringing happiness and harmony to society, then it should be discarded, and hence it should be replaced by something else. That's what we did. That's why, unlike Christianity and Islam, we don't have a single scripture. Why? Because those religions are immutable, whereas Hinduism can always change. So that's why we don't say, here is the only one Dharma Shastra. We have dozens and dozens of Dharmashastras. And even if you come back to something like Manusmriti, when the British started translating that about 300 years ago, they had to search across the country to find a single manuscript. And they had to get only small pieces from here and there. The reason was, while Hindus respected Manusmriti, okay, we continue to respect that, we were not following it, okay, because the Manusmriti is more like a constitutional framework. Okay, it can change, it can evolve, and when it has evolved, it gets replaced by something else. And even when you go back in time, something like, Kamandaka Niti Sara, which was written probably 1700 years ago, it refers to Manusmriti as a very ancient text. So what we know is that even 1700 years back, Manusmriti was a highly regarded, valuable text, but an ancient text that belonged to a different time and era. And hence, when we say Sanatana Dharma, we actually mean it is something that can undergo change. That's why we have different systems of philosophies. We had Purva Mimamsa, then it was replaced by Uttara Mimamsa, then different schools of Vedanta came out of that, Bhakti schools came out of that. So we have Lokayata traditions. If you go back to something like Arthashastra of Chanakya, he refers to 3 schools as Anvikshiki, okay, which means those which are scientific, rational schools of explanation. So those are Lokayata, Yoga, and Sankhya. And we know none of those 3 schools are popular anymore. Yoga is popular, but more as practice, not as a philosophy. But Vedanta and other traditions have replaced it. So Hinduism always underwent change. So even if there is something problematic in Hinduism, okay, which is there, and there are problematic verses, there are problematic practices in every religion. We'll talk about that subsequently. Whereas the difference is, in Hinduism, everything can change and everything has changed. Okay. And if you find something problematic, it can change. That's what Manusmriti says. That's what our religious traditions always say. And as a result of that, Hinduism can change a practice and evolve for the better. So I wanted to kind of set this context, and then wanted to talk about a little bit more about 2 of the charges that were laid. Okay, one is Hinduism is responsible for caste discrimination. Let's take the charge first. So the actual Sanskrit terms we use in India are Varna and Jati. Caste is a term that originated in the Portuguese. It's not even a correct translation, because caste means purity of blood. Whereas when you look at Varna and Jati, okay, we talk about different types of marriages. We talk about Anuloma Vivaha and Pratiloma Vivaha. Okay, so Anuloma Vivaha is one where the groom is of a so-called higher Varna, and the bride is of a so-called lower Varna. And whereas in the Anuloma, in the Pratiloma, it's the reverse. Okay, so, and the very fact that these type of marriages were allowed or tolerated actually tells that Hinduism is very flexible when it comes to caste. And the genetic evidence proves that. The genetic evidence points out that the haplogroups or the genetic markers that are shared across different jatis and different varnas within Hinduism, within India. Okay, and this can only have happened when people intermarry. And what was the difference? And the difference was, unlike in modern society, where a boy or a girl, they go to work, they go to college, and then they may go and work in Bangalore or Mumbai or anything, and they marry one of their colleagues. Those things did not happen even 100 years back, not just in India, around the world. Okay, mostly people lived as a community, and then the communities transacted marriages, okay, and people married each other. So in those scenarios, any of the interjati or intervarna marriages would have also happened at a community level. And that's why Dharma Shastras come up with 7-generation rule. When people marry across jati, across varna, after 7 generations, they get integrated into the varna system. So in other words, what we are seeing is, in Hinduism, a very flexible, a very organic, a very natural order, which is not dogmatic, which changes over a period of time. This is number 1. Number 2, let's talk about caste system with genetic evidence and linguistic evidence. So one of the charges that are leveled by our opponents, particularly the Christian missionaries, is that Hinduism created caste system. And even when Hindus are converted to Christianity or Islam, okay, we end up inheriting this caste system from Hindus. So all the blame is laid at the doorstep of Hinduism and Hindus, and they absolve themselves. What is the genetic evidence? What does the evidence say? Okay, so genetic evidence, it has been studied extensively. Okay, and we have what is called as ASI. Okay, or South Indian. Okay, so ancient South Indian haplogroups or the genetic clusters. And then the genetic evidence is absolutely clear that most of the jatis or the castes that we know of today in all of South India had come into full formation in its current shape by as much as 12,000 years before present. Okay? And how old is Hinduism? Okay, let's set aside the argument it is eternal, etc. Okay, those are beliefs. But when we look at it, we know that Hinduism is probably 4,000 to 5,000 years old. Okay, in other words, all the caste systems, the different castes that we see today, existed by the time when Hinduism originated, and it existed 12,000 years before present. That's 7,000 years before Hinduism had even come into existence. And all these castes had come into existence during the Neolithic age itself, during the Stone Age itself. Okay, so this is number one. So if somebody says that, if Christians and Muslims want to argue, hey, we just inherited caste system from Hinduism, my first response is, no, you did not inherit it from Hinduism. The different castes existed for 12,000 years in India, long before Hinduism came into existence. And just like it's a social structure that Hinduism inherited, so did Christianity and Islam. And second question is, has it always been exploitative? This is the very important question we should address. Okay, I'm going to take a few examples, and since Udayanidhi Stalin is from Tamil Nadu, I'm going to take a few examples from Tamil texts and traditions, okay, to debunk this argument. Okay, so if you take some of the most sacred scriptures of Hinduism, so those are the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, and many others. Okay, and let's stick to the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita. So the Vedas were compiled by Vyasadeva. Okay, and Bhagavad Gita again is part of the Mahabharata. Okay, and then hence compiled by Vyasadeva once again. Okay, at some level. And now who is Vyasa? So Vyasa is the son of Parashar Rishi and a fisherwoman. Okay, and himself a product of two different jatis. Okay, father a Brahmin and mother a fisherwoman. Okay, and then he becomes the most celebrated sage of Hinduism, who writes all of these texts which we revere until this date. Now let's switch from that to Tamil. Take Thiruvalluvar. Okay, Tirukkural is arguably one of the most celebrated philosophical texts of Hinduism and one of the most celebrated texts in Tamil language. And Thiruvalluvar was born into the Paraya Jati. Okay, so the Valluvars are actually the priests among the Paraya Jati people. Okay, so and then when you go back to the Sangam age, so let's stick to Thiruvalluvar for a minute. So what Thiruvalluvar does is he writes 1,330 couplets. Okay, touches every aspect of Purushartha, Dharma, Artha, Kama, everything, and then summarizes many important messages from Dharma Shastras, from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Vedic texts, from the Upanishads, everything into Tamil. Okay, that's his genius. Okay, he can take a very complex idea and he can summarize it in 7 words in a couplet. Okay, that's what he does. And then he hails from the Paraya Jati. And what does it tell you? So whenever he lived, let's say around 2,000 years ago, okay, the exact date nobody knows. Some would say he lived 1,600 years ago. Some would say 2,000 years ago. It doesn't matter, right? So regardless, in the pre-colonial era, long before the Muslims and Christians invaded India, you had a person from the Paraya Jati who had mastered our scriptures, who had mastered Tamil language, who had mastered Sanskrit, and who could render all of these things into the most celebrated collection called the Tirukkural. Now, from there, let's move on to Kamba Ramayanam. So, just like Valmiki Ramayana is the Sanskrit narrative of the sojourn of Sri Rama and Sita, so is Kamba Ramayana. It's not a translation, it's rather a rendition. Okay, most people think it's a translation of Valmiki Ramayana. It is not, it's actually a rendition. Okay, he makes a lot of changes here and there. Okay, so and who is Kamba? Vaimu Gopalakshana Krishnamacharya is arguably the greatest commentator of Kamba Ramayana. He lived about 100 years ago. And then in his introduction to the Kamba Ramayana, he goes into a lot of details, but I'll just give the summary. He says Kambar was born into a Shudra Varna. He was born into a Jati in the Shudra Varna. So once again, what we are seeing is, while Hinduism is being presented as a Brahminical religion, okay, primarily due to missionary propaganda, what we are seeing here is some of your most celebrated Sanskrit texts were written down and authored by people who are from the so-called lower Jatis. And you go to Tamil, Tirukkural was written by someone who is an ancestor of today's Parayas. And then when you look into the Kambaramayanam, he comes from the fourth Varna. Then go into something like the 4000 Divya Prabandham. Okay, so those are the most sacred Vaishnava texts, okay, in Tamil, okay, in Bhakti literature. And there are 12 Arvas. Those Arvas were the sages, the Vaishnava sages. Out of the 12, 2 were from what we call the scheduled castes of today. So one of them is Tirumalizai Alvar. Okay, there is a place called Tirumalizai in Tamil Nadu, and it's a Divya Desam, and it's a great temple. And then his poetry, which was written probably 1300 years ago, okay, so are highly celebrated by the Hindus, have always been highly celebrated. And he describes himself. He says, "Iriru kulathainum pirandillen, ayanar kalaigal navilum navindrilen." Okay, what does it mean? Translation, rough translation is, I was not born into any of the 4 Varnas, and my tongue has not relished the fine arts. And yet, he goes on to say, it's due to the blessings and mercy of Narayana that he is able to compose this poem. Okay, so now once again, what we find is, before the Islamic invasions, before the Christian invasions of India, you have individuals from today's scheduled caste have become some of our greatest saints, greatest sages, and have composed some of the greatest sacred texts of Hinduism. And this is true of Shaivism. Okay, I can go from language to language, it doesn't matter. But the net message is, a large number of our texts and traditions were written down, composed by authors from the so-called lower castes. Okay, and this is impossible if there had been caste discrimination in those days, or if untouchability had existed then. Okay, because you cannot have it both ways. You cannot say, look, we'll shun your entire community, we won't have any contact with you, and then also say, all right, by the way, you can come and study Sanskrit, you can study all of the Upanishads and everything, and you can write Tirukkural, or you can write Divya Prabandham verses, and then we'll celebrate it. It doesn't work that way. So what it proves is, before the Islamic invasions, we did not have caste discrimination, we did not have untouchability or jati-based untouchability. Okay, ritual untouchability would have always been there. Okay, but then that's not permanent. Okay, that's very temporary. However, jati-based untouchability did not exist. Okay, and there have been numerous travelers who have traveled to India, starting from Fahian in the 3rd, 4th century, then Huan Suang, many others, Greek chroniclers, okay, Persian writers, then subsequently the Muslim writers, European writers, okay, and until the 14th, 15th, 16th century, nobody is talking about any widespread caste discrimination or untouchability. Instead, they are all talking about how wealthy and affluent India is. Okay? And in fact, this has been well established by a celebrated economist by the name Angus Maddison. Okay, Angus Maddison, demonstrates that until the 17th century, India was the richest country in the world. It held about 25% of the world's GDP, okay, equivalent to what the US is today. Okay, so they are all talking about India being a very wealthy country, and that's the reason why the Europeans, the Muslims, the Greeks, the Persians, everybody wanted to invade India. Okay, nobody invades a dirt poor country. Is anybody invading North Korea? Is anybody invading Somalia? No. Okay, people want to invade countries that have a lot of natural resources, countries that are wealthy. Okay, that's exactly what Indian society was. It was a wealthy society. There was no caste discrimination before the invasion of the Muslims and Christians. Then when does it change? It changes under the Islamic invasion, because what is the most common symbol of untouchability? Night soil removal. Human beings are made to remove night soil, carry it on their person, and then dump it somewhere. Okay, but in Hinduism, even until 100 years ago, we did not build latrines or toilets inside the house. Okay, it was always by the riverside. Okay, so people would wake up in the morning, and before sunrise, they will go to the riverside, they'll perform all their ablutions. Okay, they'll go for toilet, they will bathe, and then they'll come back. And in fact, even shower was not inside the home. There are only exceptions when somebody was pregnant, or somebody is old or sick and they cannot go out to take bath. Then they will just shower inside the house in the courtyard. But otherwise, showers and toilets were not a part of the household at all. And you will find that even today, because the gypsies, they originated in India. Okay, they are the Roma people. Okay, so mostly those are the Jat people. Okay, and then and a few other Jatis too. And then they go from India, what is today's Punjab and Haryana, and then they are taken as slaves by the Muslims, and then they are sold into slavery in the slave markets of Baghdad and other places in Armenia, etc. And that's why the mountains there get the name Hindu Kush, means the graveyard of the Hindus. These people are marched, and many of them died because of extreme cold and other things and starvation, and they were sold. And even today, when the gypsy people in Europe, they build their homes, they build their toilet about 40, 50 feet away from their home. Okay. That's the Hindu practice. That has been the traditional practice. So if we did not have toilets inside the home, nobody had to remove the night soil. And when did this practice come into India? It came with the Muslims, because Muslims veiled their women. Women were forced to wear the parda, okay, the burqa, the hijab, and then they were not allowed to go outside, okay, and then they were confined. And then the Muslims brought in all the other terrible practices. Then they set up the harem, and then to guard the harem, they put the eunuchs. They captured men from the defeated people. They will go and defeat somebody, capture their men and their boys, and then castrate them, or even remove the genitals in many cases, and then make them gods of these harems. Their job is to guard the females from committing indiscreet or inappropriate, quote within quote, inappropriate behavior. So, and now these women needed toilets, okay, and then those toilets are built in the house, and then they forced Professor K.S. Lal, a very great historian who died a few years ago. He has documented all these things at length, and then he explains that the defeated Hindu warriors were forced to carry night soil on their heads. That's how this practice entered Hinduism, and that's what triggers untouchability. That's the first factor. Second one is what the British Christian rulers did. Okay? When they take over India, they take over a country which is the richest in the world. And then within no time, they commit massive genocides. Numerous writers have written about that. The well-known writer and journalist Rakesh Krishnan has written at length. And even a couple of days ago, he published an article on that, documenting how many million Indians were killed under the British rule. The estimates vary anywhere from 60 million on the conservative side to 100 million, okay, over a 200-year period. And Madhushri Mukherjee and other authors have also documented the same. So what do the British do? British impose the most brutal form of Rayatwari and Zamindari systems, okay? And then they say increase the tax to extraordinary levels, okay? And then they nominate a dominant person in each village as the zamindar, and then that person has to pay the tax no matter what, okay? And the British will turn a blind eye if he exploits others, okay? That's when a lot of these jatis, okay, many of these communities were part-time soldiers, many of the scheduled castes of today, okay? If you take the Paraya community, for example, they were part-time soldiers and part-time agricultural workers, okay? They would have had small pieces of land, okay, and then, or they may have worked in others' farms, and part of the time they'll be soldiers, okay? But both of those get destroyed by the British. Okay, first, the British impose the Zamindari Rayatwari system, okay, and that allows the local dominant people to exploit others, the agricultural serf in particular, and then they end up becoming the scheduled caste. And then the second one is military recruitment. The British come up with the idea of martial castes. Predominantly, they recruit Muslims, okay, and then few other Hindu castes like the Rajputs, Jats, and others, okay? And then they remove most of the what we call the scheduled castes of today from the recruitment pattern, okay? Now, think of it, a community that has depended on main occupations, because in those days, people did not change their occupation, okay, around the world, not just in India. And then when they are denied their sources of livelihood, that community is going to sink to the bottom. And India was, now somebody will ask, okay, well, the British did this, the Muslims did this, why did not the Hindus reform that? That's a good question, okay? Actually, Hindus tried to do that, okay? So historically, starting with sage Basavappa, going back to almost 800, 900 years, okay, to various Vaishnava sages, Shaiva sages, all the way up to Swami Vivekananda and many others, okay, they always reform, okay? Sri Narayana Guru, he did that, okay? So they looked at the practice that's set in society, okay? They realized these are not traditional Hindu practices. They understood they came as a result of colonial rule, and they tried to reform that. But why was it not widespread? Due to two reasons, okay? I think to some extent, in Hindu society itself, okay, certain kind of stagnation happened, okay, at all levels, okay? This happens to society that has been colonized. Don't forget that, starting with the invasion of Qasim in Sindh, India has been colonized for 1300 years, okay? And try doing that to any country. Look at Iraq. What happened to them? Iraq was a very, very wealthy, thriving society, okay? And 20 years of war, 30 years of war, what has it done to that country? It's totally in shambles, okay? Now think of it, 1300 years of war, subjugation, and colonization, okay? People are not going to act their best, okay? People are going to be in survival mode and turn a blind eye to the suffering of their own brothers and sisters, okay? I'm not justifying that, but that's the reality, okay, whether we like it or not. But second, what was India's average lifespan when it became independent in 1947. When she became independent in 1947, the average lifespan of Indians was 21.9 years. That was the average lifespan of Indians. Okay. Most of them were dying of starvation, dying at a very young age. Most of them died as infants. Most of them died as teenagers. That's exactly why the population of India grows manifold, because people did not know, unless I gave birth to 10 or 12, not even 2 or 3 will survive. That was the reality. So most of the Indians died very young, and India's average GDP, that was 249 rupees per year, not per month, but per year. Okay. Now contrast this with the corresponding GDP. In dollar terms, that was $83 in those days. Okay, per annum per person. Okay, and now contrast this with America. America's average GDP at that time was $1,800 per year. Okay, India's was 83. Okay, it was such a dirt poor country then. But once again, it was not the median GDP, it was the average GDP. The difference between the two is, when you say something is median GDP, it means half of the population earns below that and half above that, right? Whereas in India, it was only the average. Okay, so average means there are a lot of people who are rich. We know the Maharajas were very rich. Okay, the Zamindars were rich. So they had most of the wealth. So the average GDP of Indians would have been not $83, but I think it would have been something like $4 or $5, or 30, 40 rupees a year. Okay, it was a dirt poor country. So people were, and then there's a brilliant book. It's called The Late Victorian Holocaust by Mike Davis, and it has a lot of photographs taken towards the end of the 19th century of Indians. Okay, and you can find they look no different than the survivors of the Holocaust. They look exactly the way the concentration camp survivors looked in 1945. So I think it's to some extent unfair to expect people who are struggling to survive, okay, who are no better than concentration camp survivors, to reform every social ill in their society. Okay, but what is happening here is those who unleashed untouchability and caste discrimination and deprivation on Indian population, which are the Christian and Muslim invaders, okay, colonial rulers, okay, they also invented the clever narrative of blaming it on the caste system with their fake narrative. And that's why I debunked a lot of those things with genetic evidence. But I'll also present, you don't even have to know genetics or linguistics for that. Okay, every jati has its own religious practices. Okay, it's not common across all the Hindus. Okay, so at the time of birth, what kind of rites are performed? They vary from one jati to another. Okay, so and then what kind of wedding rites are performed? They vary from one jati to another. Okay, it's not common. Okay, and there are jatis in Hinduism that cremate the dead, and there are jatis that bury the dead. Okay, and then the practices that follow the duties we do for the ancestors, etc., they vary widely, very, very widely. Okay, and then the kind of temples we go and worship, the Kula Devata, are very different. This is not only in South India, it's there in North India, everywhere. Okay, you go to the Himalayas, okay, you take Chardham Yatra, and everywhere you will find temples for Kula Devatas. Okay, so that's how Hinduism has always been. So in other words, someone cannot create an artificial system and impose these things on everyone. Say from tomorrow you belong to the Yadav Jati, from tomorrow you belong to the the Vanir Jati, or you belong to so and so Jati, and hence here are your practices. No, these practices evolved over many, many millennia. Okay, and then all of them got came together because we shared a common fabric of dharma as Hinduism. Okay, so at the very core of it, it's a fake narrative that Hinduism created the caste system, and then on top of that, starting with that, the ills that were inflicted upon Hindu society on India were cleverly and cunningly blamed on Hinduism, while at the same time absolving the Christian and colonial rulers, okay, who are responsible for all of these things. So this is the very first one. Now, let's go back to this very fundamental argument. Okay, so since Hinduism is immutable, okay, that's this argument, which I already pointed out, it's incorrect. Okay, completely a pathetic understanding of Hinduism. Just like when we say that a banyan tree has been there forever, we do not say that it's the same sapling that was 2 inches tall 3,000 years ago, right? And today it could be a massive tree. It might have given birth to hundreds of other trees and everything, and it has undergone so much of change that you may not even recognize what has happened, but it comes off the same seed. Okay, and there is a continuity in trajectory. It's organic, it's natural, and that's how a healthy religion grows. And that's what Hinduism is. And so is Buddhism, so is Jainism, right? And all of those religions underwent significant changes over a period of time because these are not dogmatic religions. Okay, so then he says because it is immutable, it has to be eradicated. Now, let's take this argument and let's apply this to two other religions, which are actually immutable. And let's ask the question whether they should be eradicated. The Bible, the book of Revelation, okay, very clearly says that whoever as much as changes a word of the scripture will be condemned and will go to hell for eternity. Okay. In other words, not only is Christianity a religion of book, okay, it's a religion based on very specific dogmas and injunctions. It also does not allow even one change to the Bible. Okay, so that means Christianity is actually an immutable religion. Okay, if it's immutable, let's look at some of the pretty terrible teachings in Christianity. Okay, I will start with Jesus. I don't want to focus on some church fathers and others. Let's stay focused on Jesus. Jesus was a complete racist. Okay, so he was born into the Jewish race, assuming a historical Jesus existed. According to the New Testament, he was born into the Jewish race, and he considered only the Jewish people as his children, and he called everyone else dogs and swine. Okay, and that is one very gut-wrenching narrative in the New Testament. It's in Mark 7, chapter 7, verses 24 onwards. Okay, so Jesus was a faith healer. Okay, so which of course is, basically a fraud. Okay, you cannot cure anyone by faith. But in those days, superstition was rampant, and Jesus was a superstitious fellow. And then he was addressing a superstitious audience, right? And then he was a faith healer. Okay, because those people believed that every illness, a mental illness or anything, was caused by the devil. Okay, and then they will chase the evil spirits out of mind. That's why practice like exorcism came into existence in Christianity. And Jesus was a faith healer. And then a non-Jewish woman comes to him. Okay, she says, my daughter is sick. Will you cure her? Jesus says, no, I will not. Okay, because I'll only cure my own children, the Jewish people. Okay, you are all dogs. Okay, I will not cure you. Okay, so then she begs. Okay, even the dogs deserve the breadcrumbs that fall off the table. Okay, what a pathetic sight. Today, if somebody says in America, if a white doctor says, only white people are my children and blacks are dogs, I will not treat them, he will lose his license the next day and he'll go to jail. Okay, in India, if somebody said that, that person will go to jail. If somebody said, look, I belong to so-and-so caste, only those from my caste are my children, all the other jatis are dogs, that person will go to jail and will lose his medical license. Okay, and Jesus, on the other hand, displayed all of these racist tendencies, but he becomes, son of God in Christianity. Okay, so but in Christianity, it's immutable. Okay, according to Jesus, every Indian Christian is a dog. Indian Christians may not realize that, but this is there in the Bible, Mark 7:24 to 7:27. Okay, Jesus calls Indian Christian converts dogs. Okay, he says this religion is not meant for you. It is only for my Jewish people. And you cannot even change that, okay? Because the Bible says, if you change this verse, if you eradicate this verse, then you will go to hell for eternity, okay? Now, slavery, okay? Slavery, the black people suffered, Hindus suffered under the Christians, okay? I talked about the example of the Roma or the Gypsy people, okay? They were persecuted by the Christians. They are still being persecuted, okay? So if you go to the Near East today, if you go to Turkey and other places, you will find the rest of the country is wealthy, affluent, but it's only the Gypsy people who are living in tents on the side of the roads. Okay, pathetic existence. So, and slavery is rooted in Christianity. Okay, for examples, Ephesians. Okay, in the New Testament. Okay, it talks about, okay, slaves, obey your masters just as you would obey Jesus Christ. Okay, so because Christianity expected the slaves to be totally obedient to their masters, and this was went along with the Christian belief that black skin is the result of curse. That's why the African people were targeted for slavery by both Muslims and Christians. Okay, and then even when there was an attempt to eradicate slavery, okay, Christians argued, no, the Bible approves of it. Jesus has approved this, and who are we to change this? Okay, that's why Reverend Ferdinand Ross wrote a book called Slavery Ordained of God in the late 19th century, where he summarizes all of these arguments put forth by Christians, why slavery is ordained by God, by Jesus, by the Bible, and hence it should not be eradicated. Okay, and it was despite Christianity, as a rejection of Christianity, that slavery was eradicated in the West. Okay, so West came out of Christian Dark Ages. It was influenced by Renaissance, okay, by Enlightenment. A lot of those ideas come from Hinduism, Buddhism, and Greek, okay, Hellenistic philosophies, and not from Christianity. And hence, Christianity, Western societies get rid of slavery. But Christianity is responsible for slavery for the death and destructions of millions and millions of black people. Okay. And you cannot change it, because you cannot go and alter Ephesians, because if you alter a word of revelation, a word of the scripture, you'll go to hell. Okay. So now what do we do with Christianity? Should we eradicate that? Okay. Let's not stop there. Let's take women, right? Because Udayanidhi Stalin claims that Hinduism treated women poorly. Okay. Let's address this question. Okay. Is it true that women have not been treated as equals? Okay. I think it's true. Okay. It's true of every religion, not just Hinduism. Okay. It's true of Buddhism. It's true of Christianity. It's true of Islam. It's true of modern society today. Okay. Because today, it's just that the narratives have changed. Okay. A woman has to go and work for the corporate world. Her identity is that of a corporate slave. Okay. And then she can never rebel out of that. A woman can never say, if a 24-year-old woman says, look, I want to take a break for the next 3 years because I want to get pregnant and I want to raise the child, then I'll come back to work. Okay. No corporation will accept it. Okay. They'll say, okay, you're fired. Get out. Okay. So today a woman has to be a corporate. So we can fool ourselves that, today women are enjoying freedom, they are liberated, etc. No. Okay. Because freedom comes only when equality comes only when you enjoy freedom. Okay. And you should have the freedom. Look, I want to work, I don't want to work. This is true of both men and women. Okay. Even men are not free today. Okay. So hence, even we are not equals. It's a simple reality, whether we accept it or not. Okay. And then because our identity is tied to corporate profits. Okay. And how much of utility we have for the corporations. And if you are not serving the utilitarian purpose, then we'll be discarded. Okay. That's not a society of equality. That's not a society where freedom exists. Okay. Without freedom, you cannot have equality. But in olden times also, it was not different. In every society, women would have enjoyed less freedom than they ideally should. Okay. And hence, there was no equality. However, let's take something which is very, very fundamental. Okay. Sexual pleasure. Okay. Which is very natural. Okay. Which is very desirable in any society. And in Hinduism, there was never an injunction against women enjoying sexual pleasure. Okay? You go back to the most ancient times, when you understand this, when you look at the Vedic texts, when you look at Dharma Shastras and others, what you find is the most celebrated form of marriage is Gandharva Vivaha. Okay, where a boy and the girl, they meet each other, typically in a village fair. Okay, and then they will fall in love with each other. Okay, and then they start living together. Then the parents come and solemnize their marriage. Okay, then slowly other forms of marriages. There are 8 different forms of marriages that are described. They all come into existence later on. But even when other forms of marriages have taken root, including arranged marriage, Dharma Shastra still talk of Gandharva Vivaha as the most, sublime of all marriages. Okay, so then there are all the texts that repeatedly talk about Kama Shastras. Okay, Kama Shastras are full of descriptions of women enjoying pleasure as much as men. Okay, and now some of those classifications may not be valid or relevant today. Okay, because from science we understand human physiology better. Okay, that's perfectly understandable. However, when you go back even 2000 years, 2500 years, 3000 years, Hinduism had a very positive and a very rich attitude towards indulging in sexual pleasures. Okay, and that's why Krishna himself describes himself in the Bhagavad Gita as Dharma Aviruddha Kama. Okay, he is that Kama or sexuality that is not in violation of Dharma. Okay, so sexuality and sexual pleasure always had a place of pride in Hinduism, and in that sense, the women were free to explore sexual pleasures, and hence when it comes to some of those most important things in lives, they enjoyed equality. Look at Christianity. Christianity gave no freedom whatsoever to women. Okay, so you look at the New Testament. Okay, you look at the First Timothy. Okay, where Bible tells women, shut up, don't open your mouth in churches. Okay, we cannot tolerate a woman raising her voice, asking questions and all these things. Okay, if you have any doubt, go home and humbly, submissively ask your husbands to explain that. Okay, so not only that, Christianity also had an extremely negative attitude towards sexuality. Okay, particularly feminine sexuality. Okay, it was considered as something satanic. Okay, it was something to be suppressed, and Western women who were enjoying all the freedom under Greek civilization and the early Roman civilization had their freedom completely taken away once the Roman Empire became Christian in the 4th century. And from there, the first time Western women enjoyed orgasm was in the year 1953. And why 1953? Okay, because until then, Western world because of Christian influence, because of Christian teachings, shunned sexual pleasures. Okay, and then they also said that women enjoying orgasm is actually satanic possession. They called it hysterical paroxysm. Okay, and they had to be now calmed down by different procedures, from exorcism to a physician actually coming in and using his fingers to calm, quote within quote, calm down the women. Okay, so this is the most abject form of abuse of women. Okay, and how do we know? It changed in 1952 onwards. Okay, there is a brilliant book called The Technology of Orgasm by an academic by the name Rachel Maines. Okay, Rachel Maines. Okay, so she summarizes all of these data points, and then she says only in 1952 Western medicine began recognizing this as something normal and natural, and hence it changed. Okay, so while the Western women, because of Christian influence, were denied the pleasures of orgasm, starting from the 4th century till 1952, Hinduism wrote Kama Shastras. Okay, we depicted those on the walls of the temples. Okay, we depicted those in our scriptures, in our epics. Okay, and our own divinities like Rama and Sita were portrayed as sexual beings. Okay, so because of that, on some of those very important things, Hinduism actually accorded freedom to women, and as a result of that, there was equality. And as I mentioned, that equality was not perfect, and it can always improve, but it was way better than what Christianity or Islam had. Okay, then let's take just one more example I wanted to bring up. Okay, we talked about slavery. Okay, but then we have all heard of this word haram and harem, etc., right, in the Islamic context. Okay, something is halal or haram. Haram is something which is forbidden, halal is something which is permitted, and harem is a place where the Muslim women are confined. And the words harem and haram are actually cognates meaning words in sometimes two different languages, okay, having the same meaning but coming from the same root. Okay, so what is the root of all of these things? They come from the biblical word called harem. Okay, H-E-R-E-M. Okay, and then Bible actually teaches, okay, those who are not from our race and from our religion, okay, should be treated as slaves. They should be completely destroyed. We should commit a genocide of those people and even kill their cattle and then take away their wealth. And this is what drove the European colonization of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Okay, when they looked at the non-white people, the non-Christian people, they called us Amalekites. That's the term which comes from the Bible. Okay, the Amalekites, the Bible designates them as the enemies of God, and hence those are to be completely exterminated and their wealth should be stolen. That's how the British called us in the 18th and 19th century. The British newspapers and speakers, they called the people of India, the Hindus, as Amalekites. And then they said we should be completely exterminated and our wealth should be taken. And it was not only the British who did that. When the Germans went and occupied and colonized Africa, German Christians used exactly the same words and called for the extermination of the African people to steal their wealth. So this is what Christianity did to the people. Okay, those who were not Christians, okay, they were designated as worse than animals, okay, and not even human beings. And Christianity taught that a complete genocide of those people should be committed. And once again, look at the Bible. What does it teach about the second coming of Jesus? When the second coming of Jesus happens, he will torture non-believers for 5 months on earth. Then he will kill them all. Then he will load them on the hellbound cargo post-mortem and torture them in hell for eternity. Okay, so in other words, your fundamental freedom itself is denied by Christianity. Okay, if you're a non-believer and if you're a non-Jewish person, according to the Bible, you are worse than an animal and you are not deserving of any rights of freedom, and hence you can be killed and your wealth can be taken and all of these things. And that's what the Christian colonizers did for nearly a millennium, okay, or at least for 700 years. And a society, a system that accords no freedom whatsoever cannot bestow equality upon you. Okay, so this is about Christianity. Now let's turn our attention to Islam a little bit. Okay, and then when it comes to Islam, we have talked a lot about that, but today I want to just talk about one issue, okay, in Islam that should debunk the fundamental argument. Okay. Oh, so sorry. Before I go into that, in Christianity, somebody may ask, but at least, yes, Christianity treats non-Christians inhumanely and calls for their complete subjugation, slavery, and destruction. Yes, we don't treat them as equals. True, but at least all Christians are treated as equals. That is not true. Okay, as I pointed out, Christianity subjugates women. Okay, it says women cannot even open their mouth; they should shut up, and they are not even entitled to sexual pleasures. Okay, so now half of the Christian population is women, and hence they are not given any freedom, and then they are not treated as equals. So the fundamental argument that Christianity treats at least the insiders as equals is a bogus argument. And then what happens to the converted Christians who are not Jews? Okay, according to Jesus, they are dogs. Okay, and people may be fooled, Indians and others may be fooled into converting into Christianity, but according to Jesus, you are dogs. And what will happen when you die and you show up at heaven saying, "Hey Jesus, let me in because I accepted you as my savior and as my God"? He will say, "I'm sorry. In Mark 7:24 to 7:27, did you not read it? I called you dogs." Okay, and everywhere in the Sermon on the Mount and other places, I've called you swine and whatnot. And hence, why are you showing up in heaven? Okay, and why did you convert to Christianity? That will be his question. Okay, so Christianity doesn't give any equality, any freedom to anyone, including women, including converts. Now let's turn to Islam. I'll only talk about muta marriage and misyar. Okay, muta marriage is known as contractual marriage. Okay, which is the most exploitative form of marriage, and the equivalent of that this is practiced by the Shia, and then the Sunnis also practice the same thing. It's called misyar. Okay, and then there is a recent documentary that came out. And let me give you the title of the document. It's called Uncovering Iraq's Religious Front for Child Prostitution. Okay, it's on YouTube. It just came out a week or two ago. A brilliant documentary. Okay, I will also send the links, everything. You can put it up in the description later on. But I'll give us very small. This is about muta marriage and misyar marriage. Okay, which is happening in Iraq. This was studied in Iraq, but this happens across the Muslim world. It happens in India too, in Hyderabad. Hyderabad is the prime center. In a just what happens? Young girls. Okay, girls as young as 9 years old. Okay, or sold as sex slaves. Okay, men can go there. Okay, they can go and meet the mullahs, and then they can say, "Look, I want to enjoy a girl." Okay, as young as 9 years old. And then why this 9 years? I'll come to that. Okay, so as young as 9 years old, and then I'm willing to pay some money. Okay, so that's the dowry they pay. Okay, and it can be a small amount, as less as $10. Okay, and then what they can do, the mullahs then tell them, this is all done undercover, right? They record all these things in a video. Okay, the journalists. So what they do, they will arrange the girl. Okay, so the mullahs act as pimps. Okay, they arrange the girl, and then these are Muslim girls, by the way. Okay, and then these girls are Muslim as well as non-Muslim girls. Okay, Yazidis and others who are captured or worse, treated worse. But Muslim girls are also treated the same. Okay, once they are poor, there's a lot of poverty in the Muslim world, and then these girls are now sold to these men, and these men can do whatever they want. And then the mullahs tell them, okay, don't have vaginal sex with the girl. Okay, do everything else. Okay, because then we cannot sell her to the highest bidder. Okay, so they want to preserve virginity for the highest bidder. Okay, and then in that, the mullahs also say, yeah, if you want to go and have sex, go ahead and do that. Then you have to end up paying more. Okay, and then the guy is asking the question, right? Because an undercover journalist is asking the question, but the girl is only 9 years old. Yeah, if she's 9, that's good enough. You can have sex. But why this 9 years? Because the Quran says Muslims should emulate the behavior of Prophet Muhammad. And then the Hadith inform us that Prophet Muhammad married Aisha when she was 6. And between the ages of 6 and behavior of Prophet Muhammad. Okay, since he consummated the marriage with Aisha when she was 9. Okay, now all Muslims can have sex with 9-year-old girls. And this happened everywhere. Okay, in the past, I have pointed out when the ISIS went and rounded up the Yazidis, they segregated men, killed them. Okay, and the women, and among the women, they said whoever is 9 and above, okay, or 8 and above. Okay, that means you're already 9. Okay, they were sorted out. Okay, and then they were sold as sex slaves to ISIS terrorists. Okay, and those who were younger than 9, okay, they were not yet sold as sex slaves. They were held in captivity until they turned 9. Okay, so because the reason for that is Muslims who are doing that, whether it's ISIS, whether it is those who are carrying out the muta marriage or the misyar marriage, they are all emulating the behavior of Prophet Muhammad. Now, this is the most terrible form of denial of freedom and liberty to women, especially to girl children. Okay, and how can a religion that denies even the most basic freedom, okay, of very existence, of being not exploited and raped sexually and assaulted sexually, to their girl children, how can it be called an equitable religion? It's anything but equitable. It's the exact opposite of equitable religion. Okay. And this is what motivated Islam from the very beginning. So what does Muhammad do? He wages wars on non-Muslims, kills their men, takes their women, okay, as sex slaves, and ransoms them, okay, and then sells them. One of them is Safiya, right? And Safiya was ransomed for 400 dirham. And then he takes them and then he rapes those women on the very same night he had killed their husbands or their parents, men, brothers, and everyone, okay? So, and that's the behavior that's being continued till this date. And then, is this religion an equitable religion? And we know, once again, Islam, because Quran has been revealed by Allah, okay, and then it cannot be changed, okay, so you cannot change the religion, and hence it's immutable. Now, here is my question. Both Islam and Christianity are immutable religions. Their scriptures are immutable. They themselves say that. I'm not saying that, okay? It's not my interpretation. They are condemning you to hell for changing as much as one word in that. And both of those religions are terrible. They deny even recognizing non-Christians and non-Muslims as human beings. Okay, they call for destructions. Those are all written down in that text. And the entire history of Christianity and Islam is filled with such expressions of intolerance towards non-Christians and non-Muslims and their subjugation and their genocide. Then that's why one of the richest countries on earth, like India, was reduced to abject penury because of Christian and Islamic colonization. And then do they give equality to those who are converts to their own religion? No. As we saw, Islam denies equality to 50% of their population. That's women, okay? But to their children too, okay? A young girl, who is abused, okay, that's a child, okay? So children probably constitute 25% of the population, okay? They are abused. And then they are also abusing their male children because the male children are forced to undergo circumcision, which is genital mutilation, as soon as they are young kids. And then not only that, they are also taught, okay, by the virtue of being raised as Muslims, they are taught that, women are not equals, women can be subjugated, a woman's worth is half of that of a man, okay, and then, you can have sex with a 9-year-old girl. All these things are terrible teachings, right? And so even if it's a Muslim girl, she's denied all the basic freedom and liberty, okay? And hence, there is no equality in Islam. So can we say that Islam should be eradicated? Okay, I'm just borrowing Udayanidi's argument, okay? Can we say Islam should be eradicated? I think one can make a more convincing argument for that than they can make for eradicating Hinduism. Okay, because Hinduism is like I brought up the example of banyan tree. It has been there for thousands of years. It undergoes changes. Yes, there are practices that we may not approve of anymore. Okay, or we wouldn't have even approved in the days back then, but we can change those things, and we have dharma that. That's why you don't have one Dharma Shastra, you have hundreds of sacred texts and laws. And even then, when the British translated, they couldn't even find one full copy of Manusmriti or any other text. Okay, so they had to assemble bits and pieces to put it together. That's because we are not practicing things that were written 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. We constantly update. Okay, so Hinduism need not be eradicated. Hinduism can change, but Christianity is immutable, and then Islam is immutable. In the case of Islam, the Quran, the Hadiths are printed and read in every household, every Muslim household. Okay, and hence they are themselves accepting, yes, this is immutable, and we'll follow it to the last word. And hence, that leaves eradication as the only option, okay, for Islam. Okay, so now let's turn to Christianity. Christianity, once again, as I pointed out, Jesus was a thorough racist. Okay, he considered everyone except the Jewish people. He was a Jew by birth, and then as everyone but Jewish people as animals, not as human beings. Okay, and then he calls them dogs, he calls them swine. Okay, and to him, according to him, his religion was only meant for his own Jewish people. But the Jewish people rejected him. They called him a fake prophet, a false prophet. They discarded him. Okay, that's why when he was dying on the cross, he was pathetically crying, "Father, Father, why have you forsaken me?" Okay, because nobody cared for him in his own time, if at all he existed. However, those Christians, because of the teachings of the Bible, because of teachings of Jesus, treated non-Christians as subhuman beings and went about committing a genocide. The worst of that was the Holocaust, okay? Or the worst recorded. I would say the worst was the genocide of Hindus, because the British alone exterminated more than 100 million Indians, okay? A significant number of them were Hindus. But the best record is that of the Holocaust. And then in the Holocaust, the Nazis exterminated 6 million Jews and Gypsies, okay? So the reason for that was, they said the Jewish people are not human beings and they should be eradicated. This comes directly from the Bible. This comes from the words of Jesus. Jesus called the Jews children of devil. Okay, he said, the devil is your father. Okay, and you are a brood of vipers. Those are the words Jesus used towards, Jewish priests. Okay, and then now this may be strange to some of the people, right? Earlier I said, Jesus said, my religion is only for the Jewish people. Others are dogs. And now why is he calling them a brood of vipers and all of these things? That's because Christianity was, I don't believe a historical Jesus ever existed. Okay, and there is no evidence for that. And the Bible was written over several centuries. Okay, Bart Ehrman and other good scholars have demonstrated that beyond a pale of doubt. Okay, so and words are attributed to Jesus, but that's why you find initially, there is pro-Jewish hate mongering, and then there is anti-Jewish hate mongering. Okay, then subsequently, when it becomes mainstay religion of the Roman Empire, Jesus words are invented and attributed to Jesus, where he says, "Given to Caesar what is Caesar's, and given to God what is God's." Okay, and now think of it. Those are the words addressed to the Jewish people. They were being colonized by Rome. Okay, which Jew will come and tell, now pay your taxes to Caesar? Okay, that's due to him. Okay, that's like Ahmad Chalabi, right? Who went and told the Iraqi people, now, accept the American domination of Iraq. Okay, so Jesus was the original Ahmad Chalabi. Okay, so Jesus says this. So, but all of these are words invented, over 4 centuries and attributed to Jesus. But for the Christians, these are all, they believe these are the words spoken by Jesus. They always believed that. That's why they carried out the most terrible persecution of non-Christians, committed one genocide after the other. So there is no equality towards non-Christians when it comes to Christianity. But is there at least equality among Christians? The answer is no. Okay, because as I pointed out, women are not equals in Christianity. Okay, you can go against what your Bible says. Okay, then you're rejecting the Bible. And you can also even go and practice yoga. You can also chant Om, and you can still call yourself Christian. That's a different story. But if you're a true Christian, if you're practicing Christian, okay, you have to ask your women to shut up. Okay, she cannot open her mouth in the church. Okay, and she should listen to you, and she cannot enjoy sex. Okay, and if she enjoyed sex, she should be exorcised or subject to hysterical paroxysm treatment and all these things. Okay, that's what Christians did until 1950s. Okay, so this is an atrocious abuse of women. Okay, that's half of the population. So those who are insiders, those who are practicing Christians, are also not equals. Now, what happens to non-Jewish people who converted to Christianity? Okay, so very simple. Okay, they are not even considered as human beings. Okay, Mark 7:24 to 7:27. I already pointed out, Jesus calls them dogs. Read the Sermon on the Mount. He calls them swine and everything. Okay, so yeah, Jesus contradicts himself in other places. That's a different story, but that's your problem, not my problem. Okay, that's your word of God, which is self-contradictory. But here is calling you dogs. Okay, you may be an Indian Christian. You may go and worship Jesus. You may put the cross everywhere. Okay, but Jesus is very emphatically, unequivocally proclaiming that you are a dog. Okay, so he has bestowed canine status on you. Okay, and you may think you're a human being. Okay, I think you're a human being, but Jesus doesn't think you are. Okay, that's a tragedy. Okay, but even worse, the Bible says there will be only 144,000 people who will make it to heaven. Okay, all the residents of heaven, the total is only 144,000, and all of them are Jewish-born virgin men. Okay, so that means all the others are condemned to hell. Okay, there are only 2 places in Christianity. So those who are Indian Christians, especially from my state, Tamil Christians, who have converted to Christianity, too bad. Okay, unless you are a Jewish person by race and you are a virgin your entire lifetime, and you are a follower of Jesus, and even then only 144,000. Okay, even among the Jews, there are something like 10-12 million people around the planet. Okay, and even if all of them choose to convert to Christianity and become celibate men, no, too bad. Even they are not making it. According to Jesus, only 144,000 are going to make it. Okay, so, and definitely not even one of them is going to be an Indian convert to Christianity. So too bad. No equality for you. Okay, and you converted and you became a useful idiot of Christian colonizers and masters, but Jesus has condemned you to hell. Okay, so can we now, since Christianity is immutable and Christianity is full of iniquities towards women, advocates racism, and hates non-Christian people and non-Jewish people, can we eradicate Christianity? I think one could make a powerful argument for that than one could make for eradicating Hindu Dharma.
My question would be related to one of the comparisons which some of the people are drawing between what was the fate of Nupur Sharma when she made a particular statement.
Yeah.
Why isn't the statement of Udayanidhi Stalin is not treated in the similar fashion constitutionally?
The right thing to do is, under law, everyone should be treated equally, right? So, Nupur Sharma actually spoke the truth. She didn't say anything wrong. She actually quoted the Islamic text. Okay, according to Islamic text, yes, Muhammad had sex with a child, okay, a 9-year-old child. Okay, she spoke the truth. And it's not just she who says that. Okay, Zakir Naik, the Islamic preacher, says that. Okay, Yasir Qadhi, Imam and Islamic preacher, says that. Everyone says that. Okay, Islamic texts have said that. They are proud of it. And that's why I quoted the example of ISIS and others, Muta marriage with 9-year-old girl. Okay, this is Islam. Okay, she quoted the truth and she was attacked. Okay, and then she was vilified. She was given death threat, rape threats, and whatnot. Now, Udayanidhi Stalin actually lied about Sanatana Dharma. Okay, and then he abused it. Okay, and and by the way, remember, his call for eradicating Sanatana Dharma applies to all the Indic religions. Okay, because Buddhism, Jainism, everything, because Dhammo Sanatana applied to Buddhism. Okay, so but nobody is responding. Why is that? I think the reason is Jawaharlal Nehru called himself the last Englishman to rule India. Okay, that's what he told Galbraith, the American ambassador, when he met him. Okay, so he was proud of himself, of seeing himself as the brown-skinned white man. Okay, so he was viciously anti-Hindu. Okay, so the kind of narratives that were created, not only the judicial provisions, the legal provisions, but also the entire judiciary was packed with Nehruian sycophants. And then, the academy was packed with those people, especially in places like JNU. The media was full of those people. They were all chamchas of Nehru and Congress party. And ever since, they were always like that, right? Then they were, sycophants of Indira Gandhi, then Rajiv, and so on and so forth. They continued throughout. And hence, for them, they won't highlight this. Okay, so when Udayanidhi Stalin makes a statement like that, they won't highlight it. And yes, if what Nupur Sharma did was wrong, which I don't think it was. Okay, she was actually quoting the truth, and she was just vilified. And but FIRs were filed against her. But the same thing should have happened to Udayanidhi Stalin, because he was actually indulging in hate mongering and by lying, right? And in this case, I think some FIRs have been filed in Allahabad High Court, if I'm correct, and in Delhi High Court also. And I think what I would like to see is police from Uttar Pradesh or Delhi show up in Chennai, arrest this guy, take him in handcuffs, and take him to a prison in Allahabad, Prayagraj, or Maza aayega udhar to. Okay, so in Prayagraj or Tihad, okay, take this Dravidian scumbag and put him there. He will become the favorite bitch of a local, hardened prisoner. Okay, and then we will tell them what equality means. Okay, that should happen. Okay, so I'm waiting. I'm wishing that. I want that to happen. Okay, I want this guy to be dragged in handcuffs and jailed there and sent to prison. But that's only because what is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander too. Okay, but apart from that, I actually advocate free speech. Okay, even because I should be completely free to criticize, mock, and ridicule Islam or Christianity. Okay, that is what freedom is all about. Okay, that's how societies can change. Okay, and likewise, those who don't like Hinduism should be free to express whatever they want. Okay, and I think our response should be once again an intellectual response. Okay, like we are doing today, we should expose what is wrong with them. Okay, and then we should in turn actually point out the Udayanidhi Stalin is, for example, a Christian. Okay, and then his religion, he's a dog. In the eyes of Jesus, he's a dog. Okay, seriously, I'm not joking about this. This is Mark 7:24, 7:27. Okay, so at best, he can say, I am a dog of Jesus. Okay, he cannot ever say I'm a Christian. Okay, no, Jesus won't accept that. He will not go to heaven. Okay, only 144,000 Jewish virgin men are going there. Okay, so I don't think Udayanidhi Stalin is a Jew. Okay, I don't think he's a virgin, and he's probably a male. Okay, I don't know, right? So I'm not a doctor. I have not seen his medical certificate. Probably he's a male. Okay, but you don't know, right? So I mean, I'm not saying he's not, but I don't know, right? Without evidence, how can I say that? Okay, so and then, but in his case, he indulged in hate mongering. So people like that should be exposed and ridiculed and mocked. But most importantly, I think the message we should take to Hindus, okay, from one corner of the country to the other, and never let this issue go away, is to say India Alliance, of which Udayanidhi Stalin is a very important leader. Okay, he is the most important, one of the most important leaders of India Alliance. Okay, so this is the stance of India Alliance. This is the stance of Sonia Gandhi. Okay, this is the stance of Rahul Gandhi. They are all Christians. Okay, Sonia Gandhi is a Christian. Okay, and then hence this is a vicious hatred towards Hindus. That's what he's reflecting. Otherwise, she should have come out and condemned. She should have said, no, we'll kick DMK out of the India Alliance. Okay, because we don't tolerate this kind of hate mongering against Hinduism. She never said that. Okay, she is endorsing that. Okay, by her silence. Okay, so we should call this out everywhere. India Alliance is an anti-Hindu party. It's a party of Christian fanatics and Islamists. That's the message we should get out. Okay, defeat them. Okay, and then also take the message to the Christians and point out that, look, I don't know what you're thinking about yourself, but according to Jesus, you have been given canine status. Okay, you're not even human beings. Okay, so Garvapsi. Okay, we should start all of those things, because think of it, Christians, Indian Christians believe that Thomas brought Christianity to India 2000 years ago. Of course, that's bogus. Okay, there was no disciple by the name Thomas to Jesus. Okay, and then, and in fact, the Gospel of Thomas and other things, they tell a very different story. And then there are graves of Thomas, not only in Chennai, but also in Iran, and also in South America. Okay, and he's the first person. That's the Trinity of graves. Okay, I don't know whether there's really a Holy Trinity in Christianity, as Christians believe. I have not seen the slightest evidence for that. But then there is the Trinity of graves for the same person. Okay, this is the first person who got miraculously buried in 3 different places. No, there was no disciple of Jesus by the name Thomas who came to India and all these things. But Christians believe that. Okay, but we know that Christianity came to India about 1100 years ago. Okay, those are mostly Iranian traders. So those are known as, the Mar Thoma or the Thoma Christians and other things, because there was a trader by the name Thomas who brought them in. Initially, they were all Iranian names. That's what the inscriptions say. And slowly they started marrying into the locals and other things. And then local Christianity evolved. Okay, that was the Syrian Christianity of Kerala. So at least for 1,000 years, Christianity has been there in India. And I have a question for Christians too. Okay, for 1,000 years, Hindus treated you as equals. We are very tolerant towards you. Okay, we never converted you. Okay, we never forced our religion upon you. We gave you royal treatment. Okay, we gave the same treatment to the Jews, to the Parsis, to everyone. Okay, the Parsis and the Jews have reciprocated that in kind. Okay, they have been nice to Hindus.